I'm Callista.
And I'm Teresa, and this is Terrifyingly Typical True Crime.
Today, we're continuing with our theme of female killer nurses. When we talked about why a nurse would kill their patients in our 14th episode on Elizabeth Wettlaufer, we mentioned that most healthcare murderers opt for injectable medications. Given this, it's hardly surprising that when criminologists at Birmingham City University looked at 16 convicted nurses who killed over 120 hospital patients in total, they discovered that most chose to poison their victims. While it was noted that insulin overdoses were the method preferred by 25% of healthcare murderers, such as by Elizabeth, other medications like opiates and muscle relaxants and chemicals like bleach were also used. One British nurse who switched between methods like poisoning and suffocation, which accounts for around 15% of patient deaths by healthcare serial murders, was Beverley Allitt. She was convicted of murdering four children in the early 90s, as well as attempting to murder three other children and causing grievous bodily harm with intent to six more children. Over a matter of months, she used her trusted role as a nurse at Grantham and Kesteven General Hospital to go after over a dozen of the most vulnerable.
Her reign of terror began in late February 1991 when 7-week-old Liam Taylor was being treated on the children's ward of Lincolnshire's Grantham and Kesteven Hospital for a chest infection. After telling his worried parents that their son was well looked after, 22-year-old Beverley Allitt, one of the nurses on the ward, convinced them to go home and get some sleep. When they came back to the hospital after their brief time away, Beverly informed them that Liam had had a respiratory emergency, but that he was doing better now. Understandably concerned about their young son, Liam's parents decided to stay at the hospital that night. Despite this, Beverly chose to take her chances and volunteer for an extra shift, claiming she was doing so to monitor Liam. The young boy had another respiratory emergency right before midnight, but once again, he recovered. That changed when Beverly was on her own with him, though. Suddenly, Liam went pale. Then red splotches covered his face. With this sudden resurgence of color, Beverly called in the emergency resuscitation team.
Even though the attending team did their best to save Liam, he underwent cardiac arrest that caused severe brain damage. He survived only by being put on life support. On February 23rd, 1991, after speaking with his doctors, Liam's parents made the heartbreaking decision to take their irreparably damaged 7-week-old off life support. Liam was later determined to have died from a heart attack, and while those working with Beverly were bewildered as to why none of the alarms had sounded when Liam's breathing stopped, no one suspected that she was the real reason for Liam's death. Why did newly qualified nurse Beverly Allitt attack young Liam, the first of her 13 victims? What exactly was her damage, and how was she able to get away with at least 26 attacks before being stopped? Let's find out.
Born on October 4th, 1968, Beverly Gale Allitt was one of four children. She grew up in Corby Glen, a village in Lincolnshire, known for its old, quiet streets, along with the woods and fields that encase the picturesque village. Despite its charm, it is only around 8 miles away from the town of Grantham, which housed the hospital in which Beverly would later commit her many attacks. But her parents had no idea what their daughter would later become. Beverly's father, Richard Allitt, had a job in an off license, which is apparently a store in which you can buy alcohol, and her mother, Lillian, was employed as a school cleaner. They would remain in Corby Glen even after Beverly's unthinkable crimes came out. And it wasn't only her parents, brother, and two sisters who never suspected that Beverly would become violent. Even the Allitts' neighbors simply remembered Beverly as an enthusiastic and dedicated babysitter. Family friend Jeremy Marshall Roberts recalled Beverly taking his two young children, Charlie and Jamie, along with a family dog, Cromwell, for frequent walks. That is the cutest freaking name, along with the names for the villages. I'm such an Anglophile.
You know, I'm thinking the same thing.
These afternoon walks saw the young Beverly pushing Jamie in his stroller as she held Charlie's hand, apparently as innocent as the children for which she seemed to care.
In spite of these idyllic recollections, it was undeniable that Beverly exhibited concerning behavior in her youth, even if it was easily explained away. As a child, Beverly would wear casts and bandages to get attention at school. But after these covered wounds attracted the sought after attention, she would never let those concerned about her well being take a look at the supposed injuries.
I assume kids were supposed to look and sympathize, but not ask any questions.
Exactly, they needed to follow Beverly's script. While one of her friends considered the idea that Beverly's concealed injuries might not exist, most admired her courage. Those her own age weren't the only ones fooled by Beverly's act of normality either. She was the teacher's pet, far from a loner to whom no one wanted to get too close. Once she hit adolescence, her illnesses became more frequent. Not a week went by without Beverly claiming some kind of ailment, whether it be a headache, back pain, stiff neck, bruises, scratches, or stomach pain, each with an accompanying tall tale, like falling off her bike or a horse, cutting her arm, or burning her leg.
I mean, was this to get more attention from her parents, to be singled out as their favorite child doing anything to one up her siblings?
I don't think it was necessarily about targeting her parents. She just wanted more attention in general from friends, family, medical professionals, whoever could fawn over her.
I mean, that makes sense. Beverly had several hospital stays for these various alleged illnesses. Her desire for those in the medical community to continue caring for her even featured her undergoing surgery to have her healthy appendix removed. I just wonder how that happens. I can understand that she could look up symptoms associated with appendicitis and scream in pain when doctors palpitate that area. But once they have sliced her open for surgery, can't they see that the appendix looks fine? I mean, maybe not.
I mean, surely a scan would show some kind of abnormality.
You would think after this unnecessary operation, she bothered the scar to slow down the healing process and necessitated further medical attention. I'm medically squeamish, so that to me is just gross.
I also cringed when learning that.
Beverly was no stranger to self harm and got into the habit of doctor hopping when each new practitioner realized she was manufacturing symptoms. Well, I mean, at least they recognized that.
She wasn't exactly being subtle.
This pattern of behavior seems to show that Beverly had Munchausen syndrome as a teen. Richard Asher first coined the illness in 1951, taking the name from that of a German baron who in the 1700s was well known for recounting unbelievable stories to his dinner companions, often highlighting the many injuries he had suffered while playing the hero. Dr. Asher later wrote, the most remarkable feature of the syndrome is the apparent senselessness of it. Many of their falsehoods seem to have little point. They lie for the sake of lying. And I kind of love that a baron known for lying is the namesake of the condition. What a way to be remembered.
I know, right? Despite the famous cases we've all heard about, few are diagnosed with either Munchausen syndrome or Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which sees those with the disease hurting others, commonly children, who are easy to take advantage of, then playing the role of the hero as they try to save them. And side note, we know that Munchausen syndrome is now called factitious disorder, and Munchausen syndrome by proxy is referred to as factitious disorder imposed on another. But this case occurred well before the name change, so we're going to stick with those terms. Anyhow, Beverly seemed to show signs of both conditions throughout her life, but no one suspected this when Beverly was growing up. She was a good girl who helped around the house and didn't immediately spend all the money she earned babysitting. And she wanted to keep her admirable caregiving role as an adult by studying nursing. At 16, Beverly left secondary school with CSEs, or certificates of secondary education in math, English, French, and biology, along with an O level in food and nutrition. I had only ever heard of GCSEs or general certificates of secondary education before. So, in case you two were also curious, GCSEs replaced CSEs and O levels as the sole education certificate in 1986, a couple of years after Beverly received her certificates.
Thanks for clarifying because I was going to look that up.
You know, I can't help myself from looking everything up.
With these in hand, Beverly began taking a pre nursing course at Grantham College. After her classes were done for the day, she would go to the 18th century pub in Corby Glen called the Fighting Cocks. It was in this pub that she ran into Stephen Biggs in 1987. Relatively inexperienced in the world of dating, Beverly rather forcefully asked this tall road worker to become her boyfriend. Despite her eagerness, Beverly was far from a committed, loving partner. Even though Stephen purchased a ring, Beverly wouldn't move forward with plans for their wedding. She would never hold his hand when they were out, and it was also reported that they only had sex about once a month, which is far less reflective of an unhealthy relationship than the fact that they got into physical fights, one of which saw her kneeing Stephen in the crotch. He would later describe her attempts to manipulate him, such as by pretending she was pregnant or lying about having been raped by an ex boyfriend.
In 1988, when she began training as a nurse, she developed a close relationship with a female student and lied about Stephen having AIDS. It hardly needs to be said that the two never got married. Throughout her training, Beverly continued presenting with odd injuries, but this wasn't the only thing that concerned the nurses around her. Beverly apparently said that a poltergeist was plaguing her landlady. She said it had lit the bathroom curtains on fire, gave her dog pills, and menacingly stabbed a pillow with a carving knife. Police were even called about disgusting and dangerous incidents in the kitchen, such as human feces in the fridge and another fire.
Damn, that's a lot.
More than enough to warrant a call to the police, in my opinion. Similarly disgustingly, she allegedly spread fecal matter on the walls of one long term care facility during her training. And you have to assume that these incidents were never reported, although, given the later position she got in spite of her history, we can't know that for sure. More than one casualty nurse at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital later revealed that they believed Beverly needed psychiatric help, something they understandably never brought up to her.
Sure sounds like it. Maybe, psychiatric evaluation should be mandatory for nurses during their schooling.
Or concerning behavior, at least needs not to be brushed aside.
For that, Beverly continued to claim to have numerous illnesses that saw her taking a lot of time off, likely because of having skipped out on a lot of training. Beverly failed her nursing exams when she first took them. Unsurprisingly, when she went for her first interview in 1990, Boston Hospital rejected her application due to insufficient experience. This made her the only nurse among her fellow students to not find a job right after getting her qualifications. Yet, Beverly soon started commuting from her home on First Avenue in Grantham to the Children's Ward or Ward 4.
Which just sounds more ominous.
It sure does, where there were two nurses during the day and only one at night. Due to the extreme shortage of nurses on this ward, after Beverly pleaded for the opportunity to continue training at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital in 1991, she was given a 6-month contract. Her parents, Richard and Lillian Allitt, were happy for their daughter. Just as they never suspected Beverly of becoming violent, they knew nothing about the research on Munchausen syndrome by proxy by Roy Meadow, a British pediatrician who in 1977 noted mothers with medical knowledge harming their children for attention. These mothers made a habit of finding a reason to keep going back to the hospital.
Whether it was because Beverly was no longer getting the attention she craved from manufacturing her own symptoms, or if it was because she was finally in a position where there was less oversight and greater access to potential victims, Once she became a nurse at the hospital, she turned to hurting others instead. Less than a week after she had begun working at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital, as we said at the start of the episode, she attacked 7 week old Liam Taylor in late February 1991, inducing cardiac arrest, putting his parents through unimaginable pain when they were forced to take him off life support, and causing him to die from a heart attack.
Having gotten away with murder once, 2 weeks after Liam's death, 11-year-old Timothy Hardwick, who had cerebral palsy, was being treated after an epileptic seizure at his school in Newark, Nottinghamshire. No longer in the midst of a seizure, on March 5th, he arrived on the children's ward with a cannula in place to allow for a drip to be hooked up or an injection to take place. A student nurse had checked on him and found him sleeping peacefully. After her second and final check between 5 and 5:30 p.m., Beverly was asked to begin caring for Timothy. Less than 30 minutes after his vital signs had been normal, Beverly, who had been left on her own with him, called the emergency resuscitation team. They rushed to his side and saw that Timothy's heart had stopped and his lack of oxygen was causing him to turn blue. The team, which a pediatric specialist was part of, attempted to resuscitate Timothy, but it was too late. At 6:15, barely 2 hours after Timothy had come onto the ward, each attempt to revive the young boy had failed, and time of death was called. His epilepsy, which had already left him with blindness and brain damage, was suspected as the culprit. Still, the pathologist couldn't find a definitive reason for Timothy's death.
Admitted only 2 days before Timothy, Kaylee Desmond came onto Ward 4 with a chest infection. The 14-month-old appeared to be fighting off the infection, but 5 days into her treatment, Beverly watched as Kaylee suffered from cardiac arrest, not only on the same ward as her previous two victims, but lying in the same bed that Liam had died in 2 weeks before. Fortunately, though, this time the resuscitation team was able to save her. After Kaylee was moved to a different hospital in Nottingham, the doctors examining her found a bizarre puncture wound beneath her armpit. Beside this small hole was an air bubble, even though it was concluded that she had been given an accidental injection, one that had left her brain starved of oxygen and would have lifelong consequences. No further investigation was done.
That same month, on March 20th, Paul Crampton was admitted for a bronchial infection. The 5-month-old was about to be discharged, but after Beverly once again found herself alone with the patient, she sounded the alarm. As Beverly stood nearby, Paul was observed to be gray and clammy. He seemed to be experiencing insulin shock. Incidents of hypoglycemia left him nearly comatose 3 different times in 7 days. While he was revived on each of these occasions with glucose, those treating him were left scratching their heads as to why his insulin levels were fluctuating so dramatically. Luckily, Paul survived the third and final attack and was transferred to Nottingham's Queen Medical Center. The day after Paul was admitted, another of Beverly's patients went into cardiac arrest. 5-year-old Bradley Gibson had been admitted for pneumonia, and around 3 in the morning, he said that his drip was painful. His kind nurse, Beverly, went to see what was the matter. When she was at Bradley's bedside, all of a sudden the young boy slumped over. Both his breathing and heart had just stopped.
In a desperate attempt to resuscitate the 5-year-old, Bradley was shocked with a voltage normally reserved for adults. For 32 minutes, the team did everything they could to revive the young boy. He was shocked a minimum of 7 times to get his heart beating again. Finally, Bradley's heartbeat resumed, and he was moved to a Nottingham hospital where he began recovering. And even though he did eventually make a full recovery, he lost the use of his legs and control of his bladder for years after the attack. Beyond the physical problems Beverly had left him with, he would wake up screaming from nightmares in the wake of the trauma he had endured.
Jesus, she's just evil.
She really is. Doctors sent Bradley's blood away to figure out what had happened, But they were baffled when the 5-year old's tests came back showing high insulin levels. Grantham and Kesteven Hospital was in the middle of a period of unusually frequent, unexpected turns for the worse, each of which happened while Beverly was around. But no one gave this unlucky nurse a second glance.
Why? I get people die at hospitals, but why are so many people just willing to look the other way and not even question things?
I understand unexpected deaths happen more often than we'd like to think, but sometimes people die suddenly because they're murdered, and hospitals are no exception.
Yeah, that's true. Still in the clear, Beverly was able to continue attacking patients. And on March 22nd, Yik Hung, or Henry Chan, was turning blue and arching his back in distress when Beverly called for help. The 2 year old recovered with oxygen, and after medical professionals decided the young boy required special nursing, Beverly was more than willing to take on the job. Another incident while alone with Beverly caused his transfer to a better equipped hospital in Nottingham. The 2 year old recovered after getting away from Beverly, and these events were concluded to have been due to a skull fracture from a fall. Barely a week later, 2 month old Becky Phillips, who had been born premature along with her identical twin Katie, was admitted to Ward 4 on April 1st for gastroenteritis, or an upset stomach. Only 2 days later, Becky was ready to be discharged when her nurse, Beverly, clocked on and soon claimed that Becky seemed to have developed hypoglycemia. After no illness was discovered, Becky was taken home by her mother, but not before she was fed by Beverly.
That night, Becky began crying in pain and convulsing. Her worried parents called the doctor to their home, but it was thought that she might simply have colic. Her parents brought her into their bed to monitor her, but she died in the night.
So tragic. I am sure the doctor was aware of her premature birth and her recent hospital stay. I mean, might simply have colic is a fucking lazy response. How about you tell the parents to bring her to the hospital?
It's hard not to feel like, in many instances, especially with young children who can't tell you about all of their symptoms, the best way to proceed is with an overabundance of caution.
I completely agree.
With no obvious reason for death found during Becky's autopsy, doctors guessed that it might have been a case of cot death. Still, Katie was brought into Grantham and Kesteven Hospital as a precaution. Within minutes of having Katie placed in her care, her attending nurse, no points for guessing it was Beverly, was yelling cardiac arrest over Katie's navy blue body. The emergency resuscitation team was able to get Katie breathing again, but the following day, when Beverly was left alone with Katie, the infant started to cry and gasp. Her body was once again turning blue, and her heart came close to stopping.
Having been revived once more, she was moved to a Nottingham hospital. Her x rays and brain scans showed 5 broken ribs, a result of having been squeezed, as well as brain damage that was caused by having been shaken and or a lack of oxygen. In spite of these horrific injuries, no one suspected her nurse as the one who had almost killed the 2 month old. It seemed that Beverly hadn't been content with just killing Becky, the first Phillips twin, as the results of Becky's later liver and blood tests revealed that she had been injected with an insulin overdose that had caused her death as she lay beside her parents that night. In a truly terrifying turn of events, the twins' mother, Sue Phillips, asked Beverly to be Katie's godmother as a token of gratitude for saving one of her daughter's lives. Beverly, for her part, gladly took on this role for the baby she had left with cerebral palsy, hearing and sight loss, and partial paralysis.
And I can't imagine the absolute horror Sue must have felt, not that she's in any way to blame, after Beverly's crimes were revealed.
She must have been inconsolable.
I'm sure. Having murdered 3 patients and attacked numerous others not even 2 months into her first nursing job, Beverly showed no signs of stopping. Because not one, not two, not three, but 4 more unexpected attacks in separate recovering patients followed. The first attack was on 6-year old Michael Davidson, who was in recovery after an operation. His brother, Mark, was sitting beside his bed when a doctor came to give Michael a routine antibiotic injection. But what no one realized is that before the doctor had picked up that syringe, Beverly had gotten a hold of it. From his seat at his brother's bedside, Mark was directly across from Beverly as the scene played out. Less than 3 minutes after the injection had been given, Michael's body began to spasm, violently lifting off the hospital bed. The 6 year old's heart stopped, but luckily, Michael was resuscitated. The second attack saw a staff nurse racing over to 9 month old Christopher Peasgood at the sound of an alarm that monitored his breathing. After Beverly had been on her own with Christopher, the 9 month old had turned navy blue. Despite being in an oxygen tent, his level was far too low. As for Beverly, she simply watched the chaos of her colleagues trying to save the young boy from her spot near a locker. The 9 month old recovered, but left by himself with Beverly again, he had, surprise, surprise, another collapse, which she also survived. Beverly had the gall to call the ward jinxed.
She's a piece of work, my God.
Truly.
And Beverly had the audacity to keep going because the third attack occurred when 5 week old Christopher King was doing well after a routine stomach operation. But with Beverly at his bedside, he almost died from oxygen deprivation. Once transferred to Nottingham, the 5 week old made a quick recovery that left the doctors there wondering why on earth he had arrived so sick. The last attack in this series was on 7 week old Patrick Elston, who was about to be discharged. Yet another patient so close to being in the clear when, with Beverly nearby, he experienced seizures that left him with permanent damage despite being transferred to Nottingham only hours later. But her violence was finally drawing to a close with her fourth and final murder, that of Beverly's 13th victim, Claire Peck, on April 22nd, 1991. 15-month-old Claire had asthma and needed the assistance of a ventilator, but despite her illness, she arrived at the hospital smiling and winking at everyone around her. But within 2 minutes of Beverly being on her own with her, the 15-month-old went into cardiac arrest. In spite of the emergency resuscitation team saving her and the doctor even telling her parents she was recovering. Once Beverly was alone with Claire once more, again within minutes, the young girl experienced a second fatal incident of cardiac arrest.
While Claire was initially found to have died from natural causes, Nelson Porter, a consultant pediatrician at the hospital, was so concerned about the plethora of cardiac arrests, such as hers, over the past 2 months on the children's ward that he called for an inquiry.
Finally, someone was paying attention.
And he wasn't the only suspicious party. Grantham and Kesteven Hospital had two childcare consultants. Nelson Porter was one of them, and the other was Charith Naniakara, who had concerns about Liam Taylor's heart attack. Dr. Naniakara attempted to convince the hospital's coroner to request a specialist autopsy to determine if Liam had been murdered, but the hospital felt unable to install a permanent pathologist due to bureaucratic red tape at the time, which led to autopsy errors.
How surprising.
Color me shocked. Perhaps a permanent pathologist wouldn't have been so eager to explain away Claire's death. Nonetheless, it was later discovered that Claire had more than double the expected amount of potassium in her system, even though lidocaine, which can be used to treat heartbeat irregularities, was also found after her exhumation. It was the injection of a high dose of potassium chloride that killed Claire, as potassium wreaks havoc on the heart. This was why the flummoxed doctors working on her were unable to get it beating once more.
Also, around the time of Claire's murder in late April, a number of junior doctors met at the Queen's Medical Center, QMC, Nottingham, to discuss their concerns about the many children who had come to them for specialist care in the last 2 months. In the past, QMC Nottingham usually received 2 to 3 sick children per year from Grantham and Kesteven Hospital. But in this short time span, that number had more than doubled. These concerned doctors went to the professor of pediatrics, Sir David Hull. He, in turn, told the managers of the hospital that if they didn't go to the police, he would. Detective Superintendent Stuart Clifton of Lincolnshire Police was fresh off the closed case of a baby buried in a backyard when he received a call from Grantham and Kesteven Hospital on April 30th, 1991, about the high number of concerning deaths on Ward 4. In the past 59 days, four children, some of whom had come in with relatively minor concerns like gastroenteritis, had died, and another nine had almost met the same fate before fortunately being resuscitated. Imagine how many more children would have been killed or horrifically injured if an inquiry hadn't been initiated.
I know. DSI Clifton began looking into the troubling incidents that had taken place in this brief period of time. Out of the around 30 collapses on the children's ward, only three had previously been investigated. The rest weren't seen as suspicious by either hospital staff or the coroner. Amidst relieved parents whose children had been resuscitated and unconcerned police officers and medical professionals, DSI Clifton was at risk of losing his job for looking deeper. Still, he organized an incident room and discovered that many of these patients had high insulin levels, and that Beverly had claimed that the insulin refrigerator key had, strangely, disappeared.
I mean, that sounds as implausible as my dog ate my homework.
It really does have a similar ring to it. As he continued combing through the cases, DSI Clifton kept coming back to Paul Crampton, the 5 month old who had almost gone into a coma 3 times over the course of 7 days. Beyond the insulin refrigerator key being found in her possession and her shifts coinciding with each of Paul's collapses, on the fourth day Paul was on the children's ward, Beverly was the one to tell another nurse that his insulin levels needed to be checked. There would have been no reason to give Paul insulin for his bronchial infection. So, why would she point to that as the reason he was struggling to breathe?
Was she having a crisis of conscience, or was she hoping to accelerate an emergency, or was she working the savior angle?
Since she's not averse to murder, I lean towards the latter. Look at how Beverly knew exactly how to help Paul. What a great nurse.
Looking for more than circumstantial evidence to pinpoint Beverly as the culprit behind the 5 month old's nearly fatal attacks, police received the results of the blood test taken after Paul's third incident of hypoglycemia 3 weeks after starting their investigation. Professor Vincent Marks, an insulin poisoning expert at the University of Surrey, found that the 5 month old had a blood level of 47,142 milliliters when it should have been between 10 and 15 milliliters. This staggering amount was concrete proof that someone had intentionally given Paul insulin with the intent of harming him. On top of this undeniable evidence, the allocations book on the children's ward, which is a record of those assigned to every patient and during what time frame, had pages missing from when Paul kept collapsing from unexplained fluctuating insulin levels. When police searched Beverly's home, they found another allocation book, a syringe, and a hospital pillowcase. A security camera was put in the hospital. Each patient's records were examined, and the poor parents of all the victims were questioned. In each incident concerning all 13 victims, four of whom were now deceased, the only thing they had in common was the fact that Beverly Allitt was close at hand.
With what felt like considerable evidence against her, 22-year-old nurse Beverly Allitt was arrested on May 21st, 1991. Detective Michelle Billingsley rode with Beverly in the police van to Grantham Police Station and recalled the chilling smile she wore as she soaked up the attention of the press surrounding them. Throughout her time with the police, Beverly remained calm, even bordering on cocky, and didn't confess to a single attack. When interviewed, she said, "No matter what you say, I'm sticking to my story. I did not do it." And I listened to part of the interrogation, and I have to say that it was only then, hearing her high pitched voice, did it strike me how young she was at 22. I wouldn't say it's shocking, but it's somewhat mind boggling to think that as barely an adult, she had attacked over a dozen children by this point and killed four of them.
It's the stuff of nightmares.
Definitely. Faced with her firm denial and a lack of overwhelming forensic evidence, police were forced to let her out on bail. DSI Clifton was told by a superior that he was chasing rainbows and urged to bring the investigation to an end.
I mean, why not encourage your officers to look into obvious suspicious deaths instead of freaking ignoring them while you presumably sit behind your desk enjoying your tea and biscuits?
Discouraging him with so much less effort, though.
Obviously. But as spring turned to summer, DSI Clifton and fellow officers kept poring over every single attack, whether the child thankfully recovered or tragically died. On top of learning that Beverly was there for every single one of them, they found out that she had developed positive relationships with each patient and their parents, earning their trust to stay above suspicion. Connected to 13 injured or murdered patients, investigators can hardly be blamed for thinking Beverly may have harmed two more, especially because when she wasn't working on the children's ward, Beverly could be found moonlighting at a long term care home close to Grantham, a role that gave her access to even more vulnerable people she was entrusted to care for. It was at this care home on April 26, 4 days after Clara Peck's murder, that someone saw Beverly give 79-year-old Dorothy Love, a resident with diabetes, an injection. Before the hour was up, Dorothy was unconscious. It later appeared that she had been given an insulin overdose. Oh my God, she's like a cyclone of pure evil.
That's great.
Another suspicious occurrence took place when Beverly was staying with her friend while on bail after her arrest in May. On August 4th, Beverly gave her friend's 15-year-old brother, Jonathan Jobson, a fruit drink. Jonathan had complained that the drink had chalky bits in it and later experienced symptoms similar to those of diabetic Dorothy. It turned out that his grandmother also had diabetes, and the numerous tablets she used to stimulate insulin production were readily available.
That said, as compelling as Dorothy Lowe's and Jonathan Jobson's cases were, Beverly was later acquitted of all charges related to them. But despite these charges falling by the wayside, in October 1991, Beverly was arrested for 4 murders, 13 attempted murders, and 13 counts of grievous bodily harm. And this time, she wouldn't be walking free. Thorough background checks uncovered Beverly's concerning past and laid the groundwork for a diagnosis of Munchausen syndrome and Munchausen syndrome by proxy, both of which see someone seeking attention by manufacturing illnesses. Munchausen syndrome occurs when someone either pretends to have or causes actual psychological or physical symptoms in themselves, whereas Munchausen syndrome by proxy sees one person harming another, often people they care for, like a child or patient. In spite of their similarities, it's uncommon for one person to be diagnosed with both, although, like I said last time, I kind of think Janine Jones might also have had both.
I agree.
Beverly was assessed by various medical professionals in prison, and it seemed that after she failed to get the attention she wanted as a teen by manufacturing her own illnesses, she started hurting those in her care. It's also true that watching patients die by her hand would provide a sick sense of control as she played God.
Stuck in prison with no patients to harm, as her judgment day loomed, Beverly quickly lost a significant amount of weight and was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa, although the validity of that diagnosis has been questioned by some as a successful attempt to get moved from a prison to a hospital. We have no way of knowing whether it was a manipulation attempt or not, and there is no doubt that she is an unwell woman. But her drastic 70-pound weight loss did cause several trial delays. It wasn't until February 15th, 1993, that she finally appeared at Nottingham Crown Court. The prosecution explained to the jurors that Beverly was in attendance when each patient took a sudden turn for the worse. They highlighted how the rise in these unexplained incidents fell as soon as Beverly was removed from the children's ward. As for how she attacked her victims, prosecutors presented the patient's high levels of potassium and insulin, along with clear evidence of injections, such as noticeable puncture marks.
The court also learned that Beverly didn't only poison her patients with misused medications, air, or lethal ingredients. As we said at the beginning of the episode, she also deprived them of oxygen by messing with their machines or smothering them outright. Police couldn't determine which method Beverly used in every attack, but evidence like high doses of insulin potassium in the systems of multiple patients and an air bubble in another victim's body clearly showed that Beverly was behind these patients' decline. Whatever Beverly's chosen weapon, over 59 days, she caused a series of respiratory and cardiac arrests that added up to a minimum of 26 attacks. To present her motive, Professor Roy Meadow, the previously mentioned pediatrician who researched Munchausen syndrome in the 70s, also described Munchausen syndrome and Munchausen syndrome by proxy to show the jurors that Beverly presented with both. In his professional opinion, he stated that he didn't believe either diagnosis would ever go away, meaning Beverly would remain a threat to those around her for the rest of her life.
The trial went on for over 3 months, but Beverly was only in court for 16 days because of her poor health. But neither her poor health nor her lawyer's attempts to use her diagnosis as an excuse swayed the jury. And on May 23rd, 1993, 24-year-old Beverly Allitt was found guilty of murdering 4 children, attempting to murder 3 more, and inflicting 6 counts of grievous bodily harm. She was sentenced to 13 concurrent life sentences for her crimes. This was the harshest sentence ever given to a female perpetrator, fitting for the UK's first nurse convicted of murder. Justice Latham said it reflected the suffering endured by the victims and their families and the shame she had brought to the laudable profession of nursing. After only a week in prison, Beverly was formally diagnosed with Munchausen syndrome by proxy and was sent to Nottinghamshire's Rampton Secure Hospital, which is a high security facility for those incarcerated under the Mental Health Act. Even inside the secure hospital, Beverly managed to harm herself by dousing her hands in boiling water and swallowing broken glass. However, in spite of her ability to self harm at Rampton, Chris Taylor, Liam's father, has been one of several to claim that it is less of a prison and more of a holiday camp. Rampton has about 400 patients and 1,400 employees and is reported to cost taxpayers nearly $3,000 a week per patient.
While I don't think I'd classify even the nicest secure hospital as a holiday camp, I'm certainly not going to argue with the parents' rage over Beverly experiencing any sort of joy or comfort after murdering their children.
I agree. I'm sure it's not as comfy as he suggests, but I can understand his anger. I feel rageful, and I'm not one of the parents of her victims.
Same. When DSI Clifton went to see Beverly at Rampton in 1993, she confessed to 3 of the 4 murders and 6 assaults, without giving away exactly how she attacked these 9 children. Over a decade later, in August 2006, Beverly asked for her sentence to be reviewed. The probation service reached out to the families of her victims, but Beverly, rightly, stayed at Rampton. The following year, Justice Stanley Burnton upheld the minimum sentence of 30 years suggested by the Lord Chief Justice and the trial judge, which amounted to 28 years and 175 days after factoring in the 1 year and 190 days that Beverly was on remand. As recently as late 2023, Beverly, now in her mid 50s, reached that benchmark and applied for a move to a mainstream prison where she could become eligible for parole. Fortunately, after being assessed by a mental health panel in October, her appeal was denied in December, meaning she will remain at Rampton without the possibility of parole.
As she should. It seems like she will harm anyone she can. I would be worried about her being around her elderly parents if they are still alive.
Me too.
Okay, considering how many attacks Beverly got away with, it's time to talk about the inquiry. Remember Nelson Porter, one of the consultant pediatricians at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital, who was so concerned about the numerous cardiac arrests he called for an inquiry? Well, the official 1994 inquiry into Beverly Allitt's crimes placed the blame on him and the other consultant pediatrician, Chirwananiyakara. So sorry, I know I said that wrong. Who tried to get a special autopsy for Liam Taylor. A midwife turned nursing manager and a specialist nurse for sick children were also found at fault during the investigation stage of the inquiry. Wow, that's ridiculous.
Isn't it?
But Beverly's coworkers and the parents of her victims feared that blaming a few individuals was an attempt to cover for the senior management and dwindling funds that actually allowed Beverly to commit her crimes for as long as she did. Because there is no question that the paltry budget eliminated necessary oversight, a Trent Regional Authority report stated that the children's ward should have had double the number of staff, including a minimum of 5 more doctors. Like we said earlier, it was because of the shortage of nurses on Ward 4 that Beverly was given a 6 month contract. The insufficient budget meant that underqualified nurses like Beverly were hired instead of more qualified nurses who would have expected commiserate pay.
This criticized inquiry, which was launched by Secretary of State for Health Virginia Bottomley and headed by Sir Cecil Clothier, QC, was not only held privately, which was said to encourage witnesses to come forward and give all the information they had, but the three-person team also did not include any pediatricians. This resulted in the British Medical Association filing complaints that the consultant pediatricians were not being evaluated by their peers. It also led to three medical experts supporting their colleagues by pushing for the inquiry to look at the undeniable staff shortage.
This screams Lucy Letby, though I think she is actually innocent and a scapegoat.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's arguing Beverly is innocent.
Definitely not.
This pushback didn't have the desired effect, though, because Nelson Porter and Charith Naniakara had their applications to keep their positions rejected by the University Hospital NHS Trust, who started overseeing pediatric services at the hospital after Beverly's crimes came to light. Feeling as if they were scapegoats, no matter what officials said to the contrary, the consultant pediatricians went to the High Court. Dr. Porter won his appeal to the Department of Health when Health Secretary Stephen Durrell decided he should be reinstated. Dr. Naniakara, on the other hand, had his appeal disallowed because he had previously terminated his contract.
In the end, despite criticizing the two consultant pediatricians for not acting sooner, the report concluded that no one person or factor was entirely at fault. Instead, it identified multiple failures, such as the cursory glance given to Beverly's record, lack of communication, inadequate senior managers who put problematic procedures in place, poor recruitment practices, and the staff shortages on the children's ward. But even though the inquiry pinpointed the staffing problems, Sir Cecil stated that adequate staffing levels would not have stopped Beverly from harming patients. Hear, hear, Sir Cecil.
Too right.
They just would have made it harder to do so. While the report discovered shockingly that glaring red flags were missed during Beverly's time on Ward 4 that could have led to Beverly being stopped sooner and fewer children being harmed or killed, it was decided that she likely would have been able to hurt at least one child in any hospital.
Nonetheless, after consulting the evidence of 94 people during the inquiry, the report recommended 12 safeguarding measures. Some of these recommendations included having newly qualified nurses screened before securing their first job, looking at a nurse's number of sick days before employing them, and not hiring nurses with major personality disorders.
Ding, ding, ding. I think that last one is pretty important.
Seems like not choosing people who might want to harm others should be a priority when hiring medical professionals. Other recommendations from the report were that serious unexpected incidents have to be written down and distributed through a single channel. Two sick children nurses have to be on duty at all times. And whenever the alarm system on a piece of monitoring equipment fails, the equipment has to be serviced and the incident reported. Secretary of State for Health Virginia Bottomley said that each recommendation would be followed up on. She also said, the main lesson from our inquiry and our principal recommendation is that the Grantham disaster should serve to heighten awareness in all those caring for children of the possibility of malevolent intervention as a cause of unexplained clinical events. And I get we have to place a lot of trust in those caring for us, and most of them completely deserve that trust. But what? As if it was unfathomable before that evil people would go into a profession that would allow them access to vulnerable?
Again, a psychiatric evaluation needs to be mandatory.
And in saying that, we're not saying that all or even most mental health concerns should be disqualifying, but having Munchausen syndrome by proxy certainly should be.
Certainly. As much as the case mirrors Elizabeth Wettlaufer in serving as a spotlight on institutional failures, changes have been made. By 1994, there were more than double the number of registered nurses on the children's ward than in 1991. Additionally, four new consultant pediatricians from Nottingham's Queen's Medical Center took charge of the ward, as they should have, given that it was a group of doctors from this hospital who raised the alarm about the unusually high number of children who had recently come to them from Grantham and Kesteven Hospital. Still, the inquiry and Virginia Bottomley were both criticized, rightly so, especially given the argument that Grantham and Kesteven Hospital was no different than any other NHS hospital, and its failures represented the same problems affecting healthcare throughout the nation.
That said, I think her following comment does sum up the entire ordeal. Ultimately, the responsibility for what happened rested with Allitt herself. If it were not for her grotesque actions, four children would be alive today, and nine would be free from the injuries that she inflicted on them. Coming back to tireless DSI Clifton, he gave up the late nights that sometimes saw him coming home after 10 p.m. 7 days a week, long after his two sons were in bed. He is now retired with his wife and living in Lincolnshire.
Good on him.
I thought so too. As for the families of Beverley's victims, the Phillips family was given nearly £2 million in damages in 1999 to help provide the lifelong care surviving twin Katie requires. And around 3 years before this, it was decided that the health authority would compensate the 12 sets of parents whose children Beverly attacked to account for the psychological trauma they had undergone.
But as young as they were, Beverly did more than physically harm her patients. Their long term psychological trauma has never stopped haunting them. Kaylee Asher, formerly Kaylee Desmond, was the 14-month-old Beverly attacked in March 1991 by injecting air beneath Kaylee's underarm, not once, but twice. These injections of air caused her lungs to collapse and resulted in permanent brain injuries. Kaylee was diagnosed with a rare growth and development disorder before Beverly went after her, but the oxygen starvation she experienced due to the injection of air made it more difficult to manage. Kaylee, now in her mid 30s, requires continued care and lives with her parents, Alan and Sharon Asher, in Grantham. Now in their 60s, Sharon and Alan were Kaylee's foster parents in 1993 during Beverly's trial. After adopting her, they attempted to minimize Kaylee's trauma by not bringing up what she had undergone. But at the age of 14, Kaylee found out about her traumatic past. She came home from school and confronted Sharon about Beverly attacking her. Although it was this realization that resulted in a fear that something similar could happen in the future, Kaylee has been scared of hospitals since Beverly attacked her as a toddler. I bet she has, poor thing. Also, what amazing people Sharon and Alan were for adopting her, knowing the lifelong issues she would have. Many people wouldn't do that.
It's true. And when Sharon and Alan began fostering Kaylee, the then 2.5-year-old was understandably petrified of being around nurses, doctors, and even dentists. The parents were told by a psychologist that despite her age, the trauma would likely remain in her subconscious and be triggered in the future. As often happens, this was a shared trauma that affected the entire family. Because when Alan, a former Grantham mayor, got a severe case of COVID in 2020, he wasn't only scared of the infection, he was worried about what might happen to him at the hospital.
Poor guy, the fear and trauma that the whole family must still feel.
Fortunately, after a tracheotomy and 7 weeks in the intensive care unit, Alan recovered. In spite of the gratitude he feels towards those who cared for him, his fear around hospitals hasn't gone away,
And probably never will.
and I can fully understand why. One of the Asher's other daughters also hates to leave her child and the care physicians when she isn't around, even though this is sadly a common occurrence given that child's health concerns necessitate frequent hospital stays. Okay, we're going to end on that really upbeat note of the widespread effect of trauma. Next week, we'll be continuing our series on female killer nurses when we discuss the case of Kimberly Sines.
All the sources we used for this episode are in the show notes below. If you'd like to suggest a case or theme for us to discuss, feel free to email us at terrifyinglytypicalpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us at Terrifiedly Typical Podcast on Instagram and at Terrifyingly Typical Pod on TikTok. Leave us a comment below to let us know what you thought of the case. We'd love to hear your opinions.
See you next week.